What was accused rapist Santana Guyana doing out on the streets? Arrested on a charge of forcible rape, flagged as an illegal immigrant. Yet for some unknown, unfathomable reason, the rape charge is dismissed, the deportation process stopped. So Santana, a free man, free to commit murder. Avi Selk, reporter with the Dallas Morning News, and Michael Wilds, immigration attorney, as well as Mark Fuhrman, former LAPD Homicide Detective, joins us. All right, Avi, you're a reporter. You were the first one pretty much to report this case. Tell us about this.
It was actually a colleague of mine first reported it. We wrote 2 paragraphs at the beginning. There's a lot of murders in Dallas. It sounded like 2 men got into an argument at a birthday party. It escalated. One of them shot the other. The dead man's name was Jesse Benavides. About a week later, I got an email from a brother of Jesse asking to look more into the history of the man who was arrested for the murder. His name was Santana Guyana.
Okay, and what did you find out about him?
A really interesting history. Santana, about 2.5 months ago, was arrested for allegedly raping his wife. They had been together about 13 years, but apparently there's a history of domestic violence. He had done some pretty bad things.
Well, I understand he had beat her severely, put her in the hospital, a history of violence.
That's what she told authorities, yes.
But she was in the hospital for an assault.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
He was arrested and put in jail that day. Now, the rape charge went away, and we're not sure why. Police failed to go forward with it. Talking to the family, what I understand happened is the wife may have retracted her statement. She was apparently, according to them, very dependent on him. Regardless, without the rape charge, he was identified in jail as being an illegal immigrant. Federal authorities put what's called an immigration detainer on him. That should have...
He's supposed to be deported. Now, somebody lifts that detainer. Did you find out who lifted it?
ICE technically lifted it. ICE, is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the federal immigration authorities. However, when we contacted them and asked why they lifted the detainer, why he was let out in the street and apparently allegedly murdered a man 6 weeks later, they said another law enforcement agency had requested that the detainer be canceled, and that agency took responsibility for his release. Of course, the first thing I did was call up ICE, asked who's the agency. They won't say.
And, you know, I understand their answer was, it's a sensitive law enforcement issue, so we can't really tell you who the other agency is.
Absolutely.
All right, Michael, you want to tell me why this guy who was flagged for deportation, the charges are mysteriously dropped of rape and has a history of violence here, according to people who know him well, why shouldn't this guy be deported?
This guy probably should have been deported, Judge, but was actually acting as an informant. We know the state, local, federal authorities always use these assets and turn them forward. They undermined the threat against the Saudi ambassador because they used an informant recently. The ethics of this is horrible. Somebody died because of this, but the federal government thought it was worse if they allowed this guy to go than using him and turning him to get somebody even worse. The question is, Judge, what kind of protocols do they have in place? The issue here isn't just...
We'll never know, Michael. We'll never know because the federal government looks at everybody and says it's sensitive. We're not going to tell you. Mark Fuhrman, tell me, what is it about cases like this where the federal government can come in on a man who not only has a history of violence, but apparently held a gun to his own head in an attempt to kill himself, and they say, we're going to let you walk and we're not going to deport you? I mean, are we entitled to know, as Michael says, what this guy is giving us to cut him loose like this?
No, I don't think we really have the right to know. I believe that the first charge would have kept him in jail and ultimately probably got him deported or put in prison. But I believe the victim probably declined to cooperate with the prosecution, which opened up the opportunity for them to have their informant released to continue the work that they had. Now, Judge, I want everybody to know that in narcotics cases, there's only 2 ways you get big cases: undercover or informants. Informants are part of the problem, but they're scumbags, and if you don't get down and use scumbags, you're not going to make your case. And in a lot of other areas, including homicide, the same is true. So this scenario could be played out, and probably has been played out in every major city in the country.
There's no question. Mark, when I was DA, I had confidential informants too. But there is a balancing test where you weigh a man who is capable of extreme violence and taking guns, and then you're just saying, you know, we're going to cut him loose. I mean, this guy should have been deported, Michael.
No doubt he should have been deported, but they thought that he was less than a risk to the public. The
You know
question
what?
is,
Then they weren't thinking, or they're stupid,
but we
because the
can't
history
draw,
of violence doesn't stop.
we can't draw the wrong conclusion.
I'm not drawing it. He
Respectfully,
killed someone.
I understand that, but this is not about his immigration status. This is about the federal government's protocols in place and whether or not they're meeting the balancing test that you so eloquently stated between putting out people and putting out information. When you turn somebody and you can take down a leader in a Mexican cartel because of somebody who did something wrong, what kind of protocols do they have? What kind of eyes do they have on him in the
That's
field?
a great theory, but we don't know what this guy was giving anyone to let him loose and kill someone. Mark, you wanted to say something. I'll close with you, Mark Fuhrman.
Well, you know, Judge, when you see that, there's no way that the federal government would know that he would resort to violence because he was actually free because he was working for them. So they didn't have any intent to actually put a violent person out on the street. And which confidential informant?
Mark, with all due respect, they may not have intended it, but when you have a history of violence, you don't just decide you're going to get redemption and clean yourself up.
Right.
You put a woman in the hospital, you beat her, that's serious stuff.
No,
I wrote this down, Judge. I
don't believe that, Judge.
But protocol they have to go through a writing that they give before it hits an immigration.
Yeah, but they don't tell anybody about it. They hide behind it. Mark, why don't you finish, Mark? Go ahead.
Judge, which person that's a confidential informant in the violent world of drugs or homicide or cartels that isn't a violent person? So every person that's a confidential informant, it has the tendency and lives in the violence that we're talking about. So you can't use that litmus test to actually solve this.
Well, you know, that would be terrific, except as far as I'm concerned, there is a woman who is severely injured and another man who's dead. The guy should have been deported irrespective of all of that. In any event, Avi,
That's true.
Michael, and Mark, thank you very much. Thank you.